Well, they're quite consistent in saying that the common political foundation of One China is essential to restore dialogue and cross-strait ties to their former state, and indeed to further advance them. The real emotion is reserved for rejecting any movement toward independence. Think about Xi's adoption of the so-called 6-any, the overrule statement that was first included in his PLA anniversary statement a couple of months ago, and now he incorporated wholesale into his report to the 19th Party Congress. Just to remind you, at least the English translation, we will never allow any person, any organization, or any political party to split any part of Chinese territory from China at any time or in any form. That's pretty orthodox, I would say. There's not a lot of room for flexibility. But this is on independence. This is on separation. This is on sovereignty. This is on territorial integrity as a problem. Now, it may be that one impetus for taking it over in such a strong way in this particular speech has been the recent appointment of Lai Ching-te as premier. I don't know that, but as we all do know, Lai is an outspoken Taiwan independence advocate. He even said that when he was in Mainland some time ago, and he has said it since he came in as premier, although there's been a lot of questioning of why, as the premier who has no responsibility for cross-strait relations, he did that. And he's basically said to the members of the legislature, please stop asking me my views. You know my views, but I don't have responsibility. It's the president's responsibility. But he's continued to make some statements. So my argument back against looking at Lai's ascension, if you will, to premier, beyond saying I do not believe he is a firebrand. I don't think he's going to will be a guy who set the house on fire on this issue. He believes what he believes. Is that there is this distinction between you got to accept One China if you're going to have dialogue and all the rest of that, versus if you think about going to independence in any way, shape, or form, we're going to whack you. There's a big difference here. And I think it makes a big difference to Xi Jinping and the leadership's credibility within the mainland as well. This call to action in case of movement toward independence is not new. And it's reflected, for example, in Article 8 of the Anti-Secession Law of March 2005. But that doesn't mean it's less important. Moreover, in my view, a Chinese mainland academic colleague once asked me whether I thought One China, three systems might be okay. Obviously, the Hong Kong system, although one country, two systems, which was originally designed for Taiwan anyway, isn't suitable for Taiwan. Nobody there accepts it. But you thought, okay, well, what if a different system? And indeed, the hints that have been laid out are that it would be different. But I responded, the basic problem is not the number of systems. In the views of people in Taiwan, the problem is the number of countries. So while there's evidence that I would argue that people are not willing to back Taiwan independence in an active way because it's simply too dangerous, there's also very strong evidence that they reject unification. And so I felt perfectly comfortable in responding in that way. A basic question is whether this always has to be the case. I don't know the answer. And some of you may have very strong views in this room about that. But I frankly don't rule out arrangements in the future under a, quote, One China rubric that rests on different conceptions from those now being considered for what One China is what unification is, what sovereignty is. And in fact, when I spoke here last, I think it was, about 5 years ago, Larry, that I may well have mentioned that I've spoken with senior DPP officials who say there are versions of one China we could live under. Not the ones people are talking about, but as I say, under different conceptions. So I took that statement from a very senior guy in the DPP seriously. I think it's logical, and I take it seriously now. It isn't going to happen anytime soon. I suspect that Xi Jinping has not come, I suspect strongly, that Xi Jinping has not come so far in his thinking as to deeply consider those kinds of fundamental conceptual changes. But I would note that he really has never, at least to my understanding, defined what one China would be. Beyond the fact that both would be within a single sovereign entity. And that unification would be an integral part of the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. But what that actually means has not been defined, and colleagues of mine in the mainland who spend full time working on Taiwan agree with that. They don't know what it means either, beyond what I've just said. Xi Jinping has given strong hints about flexibility in arrangements, including even in the 19th Party Congress report, when he spoke of preserving Taiwan's way of life and social system. But keep in mind, this was not new either. He had made similar statements in the past. He made something really similar to it, if not identical. I haven't checked the Chinese. When Lian Zhan visited in early 2014. I think he's sincere about this. I think he wants to adjust things so that they're acceptable to people in Taiwan. But what he's missing, if that's the way he conceives of it, is that doesn't really get at the basic concern that a lot of people in Taiwan have, not about only maintaining their way of life, but about their standing. And I might add, about their dignity. What about U.S. interests and roles in all of this? Obviously, U.S. policy has evolved in major ways over the post-World War II years, the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s and the 70s, when political forces in the United States contended not only on the basis of long-standing personal and other associations, but also when anti-communism and dark images of Red China were so important. Now, as Carl indicated and Larry indicated in their remarks after I came in, concerns about China's large and growing impact on a broad spectrum of American interests and issues have changed dramatically and are very high on the agenda in many cases. But if anything, I would argue, and I would say, and if anything, they've grown in importance. They certainly have not shrunk. But preservation of peace and stability has been the paramount concern. And I would argue, having played a certain role in all of this, it may sound somewhat boastful for my small role, but I think for the most part the U.S. across administrations, across parties, has done a pretty good job at managing our Taiwan policy well, preserving and protecting American and I would say Taiwan's interests. Not first best in many cases, but you don't always get first best. Of course, we have yielded on the issue of recognizing ROC sovereignty and diplomatic relations, but I believe it could not have been otherwise. Indeed, I would argue if we had tried to maintain the positions we had before, both Taiwan and the United States, and I would say probably the entire region would be far worse off than we are today. So to me anyway, and I'm open obviously to hearing your views, that's not the issue. The debate, if there is one today, is between small groups of those who would in essence to use an American term of jargon, throw Taiwan under the bus for the sake of crafting a more productive relationship with Beijing, on the one hand, and those who would not only like to instill more substance into U.S.-Taiwan relations, but to amend the character of those relations in a very real, if undeclared way, echoing what Ronald Reagan sought to do for at least a short while during his presidential campaign, which is to restore greater officiality to the relationship. I don't believe, and I'll be very frank in saying, that I don't believe this would be in the interest of the United States or Taiwan. I have no problem. In fact, I strongly support the idea of deepening and broadening important aspects of U.S.-Taiwan relations. But I believe that some of the proposals go way beyond that, and beyond the very important goal of enhancing, as I said, the dignity that needs to be accorded to the people of Taiwan. These proposals seem to be based on an assumption that U.S. PRC relations are so integrated that almost no matter what we do, U.S. PRC relations are so integrated that no matter what we do, other than accord Taiwan diplomatic status, would not fundamentally disrupt Washington-Beijing ties. We can talk more about that, but I would raise a very strong cautionary flag about that idea, suggesting that what happens regarding U.S.-Taiwan policy can have a fundamental impact elsewhere, and vice versa. Finally, I would say, just briefly again to return so I can put it on the table, to the issue of something about soft or cultural independence. As part of Xi Jinping's expressed willingness to respect Taiwan's way of life, obviously it needs to encompass social and historical experiences that are not shared with the mainland. But I'm very direct in saying that current proposals to set Taiwan history, especially within history textbooks, totally apart from Chinese history as is proposed by at least one commission under the Education Ministry, whether it's intellectually justified or emotionally supported or not, sends a very strong political message that exceeds in importance, in my judgment, any academic or intellectual reasoning. Tsai Ing-wen has made a big point, again, both early in her, even in her campaign, and now again, that democratic leaders, indeed any political leaders, but especially democratic leaders, must take responsibility for their actions. And it strikes me that this is an area where that important idea applies. So what are we going to see going forward? Well, of course, I don't know. I don't foresee a security crisis, and I refer you to Xi Jinping's words about peaceful unification and peaceful development of relations and all of that, which shows no change in my view. I certainly wouldn't rule out Beijing ramping up pressure on the Tsai administration in various ways, in the areas I mentioned and others. But on the other hand, I wouldn't exclude entirely either the possibility that if Beijing can see its way to focusing on issues directly related to actively pursuing independence and not on the adoption of a one China mantra, some possibility could exist at least to explore this path forward. And I'd have to say, if not now, when? It would require Tsai Ing-wen saying things she has not directly said up to this point. For example, about Taiwan independence not being on her agenda, which in my view, it is not. Probably to make real progress